screen is shared.
Okay.
You need to share the other desktop.
So we have to either.
I znowu zdechło. That's good, but you need to unmute first. You need to unmute, please.
Now it's fine?
Yeah, we can hear you, but the screen is not shared now.
Now it's green.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, just minimize this one and it should be fine.
Well, leave it as it is. It's better than nothing.
No.
Big screen, but
Escape, maybe. Green one, okay, and now a yellow one. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, floor is yours.
Okay. All right. So sorry about the delay and the technical difficulties. It's a real pleasure to be here in this lovely building, which I'm sure is going to be even better after the renovations are done. I'm very happy to be visiting Poland. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about some work that I and others have been doing over some years now on observing and modeling the internal kinematics of the Magellanic Clouds and what we hope to gain from that. Oh. There you go. Yeah. So here's a fairly famous picture now of from the Gaia collaboration showing the internal rotation and proper motion of stars in the Magellanic Clouds. You can clearly see the flow of stars. But from modeling and observing the internal kinematics, we're hoping to get for the Magellanic Clouds, basic parameters like the mass profile, the structure, the geometry of the galaxy, because those things are basic ingredients to using the Magellanic Clouds as clues to the formation of galaxies. Magellanic Clouds being so nearby, but also conveniently outside our own galaxy, are really excellent laboratories for studying the formation of galaxies, as well as evolution and the role of interactions in galaxy evolution, since the Magellanic Clouds are an interacting system. And this can also lead to our understanding of the impact on the baryon cycle in galaxies, which is itself a very important ingredient in understanding how galaxies form and evolve. And by trying to model everything that we see, we can also hope to discover things that don't fit the models, because those are often some of the most interesting things to learn about. So some of the ingredients to consider here are stars, so of all populations, ages, metallicities, and also star clusters can be used for piecing together the internal kinematics. And also the gas, so both the neutral and the ionized gas have important roles to play in how the galaxies are shaped by their interaction and the kinematics. And so I put up various surveys which will likely be familiar to you. So here is from SMASH of the LMC and the SMC. These are surveys that we did using the dark energy camera at the CTIO 4 meter. We have SDSS-IV APOGEE, which is taking spectra over many fields across the Magellanic Clouds. There's, of course, Gaia, which gives us the proper motion data, and now also spectroscopy for velocities. There's the H1 map from an Australian group at ATCA and Parks, and also ionized gas maps, which I haven't shown here, or molecular gas. Ionized gas from M-cells, that's an imaging survey that was done at Cerro Toledo. All can be used to try to understand the internal kinematics. Before diving into working on this, I think it's Roland Vandermarl published a really fundamental paper in understanding the kinematics that we see of galaxies like the Magellanic Clouds that really subtend large angles on the sky. So things that are important to consider are the motion of the center of mass, the results of external forces, which can produce precession, nutation, and also tides on the galaxies. The internal rotation, which is often the thing that we're particularly interested in because it leads to the mass and the mass profile. And also random versus ordered motion. So this figure from Roland's paper just sets up the coordinate system that we have used throughout our work. And the thing to consider is that for a galaxy like the LMC, which I'm just diagramming here as a flat plane tilted with respect to our line of sight, can have some internal rotation. Since it subtends a large angle on the sky, its space motion vector, so the center of mass motion vector, has different projections into the line of sight and also into the tangent plane, depending on where you look, right? So I'm showing this in these diagrams here, where you can break apart the different components of the internal kinematics. So here on the upper left is just the line of sight motion, which if you map it across the sky, has sort of a bowl shape because you're seeing the effect of that projection. This is two components of the tangential motion vector, which induces a gradient, right? And then there's the internal rotation, which has this familiar sort of spider-like pattern that you see in galaxies. You add all of those up together and you get something like this. And this is just the center of mass contribution, and this is more or less what one should see on the sky. And you can see that most of this pattern is actually dominated by the center of mass motion contribution because the tangential motion of the LMC is quite fast, and so that projection effect into the line of sight is strong. And so one has to really understand the center of mass motion of these galaxies in order to understand their internal kinematics. You get similar sorts of effects in the proper motion map. So here is just the contribution that we think comes from internal rotation in the LMC. Here is the center of mass motion contribution, which also it has both the gradients in both directions and ends up mimicking some of the aspects of internal rotation if you don't account for it, right? And so you sum those up together, and this is what you get. And what we're usually interested in is the internal rotation. You can show the effect if you take the H1 map from Kim et al. And you plot this sort of take off the mean velocity and use color to show velocity, right? You would assume that this galaxy has a rotation, right, where this top part is coming towards you. And the bottom part is, the bottom part is coming towards you, the top part away. But taking out that center of mass motion contribution really twists the line of nodes, right? And so, and you also see that there are parts of the galaxy that clearly don't obey the disk-like rotation of the bulk of the galaxy. And so again, just driving home that to interpret anything that you see in the kinematics of the Magellanic Clouds, because they subtend large angles on the sky, you had to get that center of mass motion correction right. So to summarize the measurements that that we and others have been using to study the internal kinematics. So we're getting line of sight velocities from PI programs that many of us have collected from APOGEE, Gaia, SkyMapper, getting proper motions from HSP and Gaia have all contributed here. And also gas, where we don't have proper motion, but we do have line of sight velocities in H1 in molecular gas and other neutral and ionized gas emission and absorption from projects like Ulysses that are doing line of sight studies. Okay, so modeling the internal kinematics, there are many groups that have been working on this, involved doing multi-parameter fits where you have to take into account the center of mass coordinates, the center of mass velocity vector, as we've been discussing, the disinclination of the line of nodes angle, rotation curve shape and amplitude. There are many models, sort of parametric models that can apply here. The different velocity dispersion components. In the SMC, one has to consider the tidal expansion possibility because it's interacting and being stripped apart by the LMC, you think. This can all be done using 1D, 2D, or 3D velocities if we can combine the proper motions and the line of sight velocities. And this is a corner plot from a fit that I've done with all of these parameters listed here, just showing the correlations and the dispersions parameters that we get out. So a brief discussion of some results of this kind of modeling effort. This was from Paul Zidek and the LMC. It's also recent work by Claire Berry, where basically took that fitting procedure that I just described and are looking at the SMC. If you look at the internal parts of the SMC, you see a hint of internal rotation, and so that's in that parameter here. When you look at larger scales, you clearly see the impact of tidal stretching in the velocities. And this is all after taking into account that center of mass motion contribution. So in the SMC, there's clear evidence for tidal expansion of the galaxy. In the LMC, so we're interested in the mass and the mass profile. This is from work by Marl and Carvalho using HSP proper motions and ground-based line of sight velocities. Right, so where you can, after taking out that center of mass motion contribution, you can get the circuit velocity, something like 90 kilometers a second, closely lines up what you get from the young stars. In older stars, of course, you get lower rotation amplitudes and a shallow rise of the rotation curve due to asymmetric drift, right? So with this study, you can see that the enclosed mass is something like 10 to the 10th solar masses, which makes the virial radius, or the mass out to the virial radius, about 10 to the 11th. So the LMC is quite a massive galaxy. It's important for understanding its role in shaping our own Milky Way. You can break that mass and the mass profile into more finer division of population components, as Oscar Jimenez Hans has done, showing again rotation curve amplitudes within 8 kiloparsecs of around 90 kilometers a second. You can resolve the asymmetric drift as a function of age quite well. You can also see some of the effects of bar and spiral arms on the internal kinematics near the center of the LMC. And trying to really pin down the total mass of the LMC, it helps to go get tracers as far as you can get, as was done by Laura Watkins. So using 3D velocities of Glover clusters here out to 13 kiloparsecs or so, you get an enclosed mass of now a few times 10 to the 10. And with evidence that this is in a flattened system, so it's sort of a disk-like system of Glover clusters, as Bob Schomer found many years ago. And again, a virial mass of 1 or 2 times 10 to the 11 solar masses. So again, confirming that the LMC is quite massive. Okay, so having done lots of the work on fitting the basic rotation curve, this is from a paper that we published some years ago now. We're fitting to the young red supergiant population. You can show he's. I'm out of practice. Sorry about that. And you can see that the stars, the young stars, red supergiants are stars that are evolved massive stars, and they have ages of 50 million years or so. They trace out that flat rotation curve quite well. We're overplotting them on top of H1 velocities from the gas, H1 gas velocities. Where we basically taken the line of sight velocities from the H1 and assumed that the velocity signature that you see is due to in-plane circular motions, right? So that, and you can see that the bulk of that gas traces very well the young stars, as you would expect, because that's where the young stars form. But there are these the parts of the gas that clearly don't follow that rotation curve and violate that assumption of disk-like rotation in the plane of the LMC. And this rotation curve that we derived agrees quite well with what you get from proper motion from Gaia. So I think, to dig into this a little bit further, going back to this map of Sylvian Kim's H1 map after you take out the center of mass contribution, and deprojecting it so that you take this map and derive the implied in-plane circular velocities. Going to just draw some boxes around arms that were identified by Lister Staley Smith from Kim's data as tidal arms that connect to the SMC, and they map onto these features here, right? So this arm E is in here, this arm B is in here. The W is actually sort of an extension of this flat rotation curve, which we think is the disk of the LMC. This arm S maps to this thing over here. You can do the reverse as well, and take this map of sort of in-plane circle velocity of the H1, just outline the red thing, and you see that, okay, yeah, this looks like what is the disk of the LMC, but these other things clearly map onto these tidal arms, okay? And if you look at this in the broader context, this is from David Niederer's map of the Magellanic Stream. What we're looking at are these features that emanate from the LMC here in the south, connect to the bridge and the Magellanic Stream. And so we think these arms are connected to that interaction between the LMC and the SMC. Now, something else that we did, this is now also a few years ago. So looking at the older stars, not just the young stars now, these are mostly APOGEE and red giant stars. And you can see that in this older population, the bulk of the stars, they follow the same sort of flat rotation curve as the young stars do, with a reduced amplitude due to asymmetric drift. But there are quite a few stars that fall on top in this diagram. They fall on top of these where we see the H1 arm signature, right? And so we can take our model of the internal kinematics, subtract it from the velocities that we observe of all these stars, and make a residual diagram, and just look at the tails of the residual, and they all fall mainly down in this area, also some up here, which is interesting. And if we look at these outliers and just project it onto the sky, the normal sample of stars, right, has this blue to red gradient that we see here. It's the internal rotation of the disk. You take the outliers, which are like 5% of the total sample, they have the opposite gradient, right? And so without, I'll get to proper motions in a second, but at the time they concluded that, well, so either these stars were counter-rotating in the LMC disk, which would be very strange, or they simply have a different geometry, right? Because with line of sight velocities only, without geometry, we don't know whether the population could be spinning one way or the other. You add the proper motions from Gaia, and we can look at the outliers again through the proper motions. So the blue vectors here are our outlier population. The red vectors are the normal population. And here we sort of spatially averaged those proper motions and subtracted the model in order to beat down the noise. And you can see that the model explains the normal rotating population quite well because the proper motion residuals now drop to 0. In the case of the outlier population, they don't quite disappear. They have some residual proper motion in them. And so what we think is happening is that this population of outliers is actually co-rotating with the main LMC disk, but is tilted at an angle something like 35 or 40 degrees, so that it's spinning in the same disk but has the opposite sort of sense of the geometry, roughly speaking. This was interesting when we discovered it, because it's the kind of thing that one might want to know about in exploring the microlensing signal from the LMC, right? Because if you have a population of stars in front and behind the disk that we think came from the interaction with the SMC, you'd want to know. From APOGEE, it's also interesting to look at the abundances, right? So we've plotted here the histogram of LMC stars to the normal LMC population that you see in the kinematics, and it has this blue abundance distribution, sort of with a peak at around minus 0.7 or so, because these are the older stars in the LMC. SMC has of course more metal core. The outliers is sort of the mix of the SMC-like distribution and the LMC one. Maybe it has it's a combination of the two. And so we concluded from this that possibly what is happening is that it's the outliers were formed as part of the interaction with the SMC and are actually captured SMC stars, some of them, in the disk of the LMC. So we've also been looking at the ionized gas kinematics. So this is from a recent paper that was on with Hongming Zheng. And what she had been working on is looking at the outflows from the LMC disk using Ulysses, where your background quasars, sources here, you get spectra of those quasars, look for absorption lines in the gas of the LMC to detect the outflows. What we've seen is sort of mapping different ionization species. You clearly see the signature of outflow. So here is the model that we have here, where you got Ulysses sight lines that are pointing to background sources. They pass through the LMC. We look for these species and try to measure the outflow velocity. A couple of the sight lines down here in silicon 2 actually look like they have inflow, right? And so and that happens to be in this region here where we've identified these arms that connect to SMC. And we also identified stars that have the kinematic signature of those arms, right? So what we're wondering is, so some people have thought that these arms are actually being launched out, and that may still be true for part of it, by the star formation activity at 30 Doradus, right, which is the most active star forming region in the local group. But what we think is happening is you're actually getting inflow of that gas, so that's detected possibly here, and which makes sense given the kinematics of this gas and the association with the stars that we think might have come from the SMC along with it, so that this gas is actually falling into 30 Doradus, creating the pressure to contain that star forming region, right? And also, I think it could be a natural explanation for why you see such high gas density on the eastern rim of the LMC because of that pilot. But you also see the outflow, and so I think Young's model of the LMC also has a bow shock in it, which is protecting essentially this outflow gas and also possibly the gas coming in from the SMC, because it'd be hard to, without that bow shock, it would be hard to see how that gas kinematics would not be shaped by the interaction with our gaseous halo in the Milky Way. So yeah, this is still, I think, fairly early days for trying to piece together this picture of what the gas is doing. Have stars been traded between the LMC and the SMC? What role has the interaction had? But I think there's evidence growing that at least part of what's happening is that you have inflowing gas that's fueling the star formation activity in 30 Doradus. And this is interesting to put in the context of modeling the collision, right? So this is from a paper by Bertina Vessela in 2012. This is following their work on measuring the center of mass motion of the LMC with HST data. They also were linking this with numerical models. And the model that she settled on is to best explain the velocity vectors of the LMC and the SMC was one where, so this is showing combined LMC and SMC particles in a simulation. This is just showing SMC particles And what's happened here is that the SMC had a recent collision with the LMC. This is like 300 million years ago, which sprayed stars across the sky. Should have created a very strong leading arm feature, but also stars in the maximum extreme. And also would have deposited SMC stars clearly onto the face of the LMC disk, which is what we thought we had observed. So I think from SMASH and Delve, we've been looking hard for the stuff out here. Don't really have clear signatures of it yet, so I don't think the model in detail is necessarily correct, but the idea of a collision helping to create this close interaction, the stripping of stars from the SMC by the LMC, this inflowing gas, I think all makes some intuitive sense, right? So we're pursuing this actively. The other thing we can do is look at the noisiness of the internal proper motion. This is a paper by Yoon Choi. Where you take, so we modeled the internal, the proper motions from Gaia. These are red clump stars. We show that with our, just using our model of the kinematics, you can reproduce the geometrically derived inclination and line node position angles quite well. So that, that lends some support to, that we're doing the internal kinematics modeling pretty well. And then we looked at the distribution of the residuals and also compared this to the distribution of residuals that we would get in the simulations, right? So this is observations here. These are simulations, and we're looking at essentially the distribution of the residuals, and we found that in model 1, the disk model 1 is a model where no collision happens between the LMC and SMC. It's just keep quiet. Model 2, which is where this collision happens, you can try to set the timing of the collision by the distribution of the residual proper motion, which was the point of this paper. Another use of the modeling internal kinematics and looking for departures from it is to look at debris in the periphery. So this is being done by a number of groups. I was on a paper with Xinlun Cheng and Paul Bassana, Laura Fullerane, and it's favored by Navarrete have also been looking for this debris. And so this is now Gaia proper motion data of the LMC and the SMC, where we have used our model to essentially sort of deproject the proper motion and turn it into an internal velocity map. So you can see that in the LMC you have sort of a rising intensity of the velocity, which is the flat rotation curve, and the SMC has a very different internal velocity in this diagram, so it's a part. So there's all this stuff down here that has quite distinct velocities in this analysis, which is we think debris associated with the interaction between the LMC and the SMC. We also looked at metallicities of this stuff to try to determine the origin. Some of it looks like it's more LMC-like, some is more SMC-like. It's quite complicated, I think, piecing together the origin of this debris. But this is still fruitful ground for research. Let's see. It's gonna talk a little bit about Rubin, since we're here for the Rubin LSST workshop this week. One of the pillars of the Rubin science case is mapping the Milky Way. And this slide is just showing how going from sort of Sloan-like depth to Rubin-like depth really should reveal a lot of structure around the Milky Way halo that should be very interesting. This is a model of Milky Way structure showing the kinds of things that you can discover, dwarf galaxies in the Milky Way halo, structure itself around the Milky Way. And the circle here is the limit out to which LSST will get RLIRE, so you can get distances from the RLIRE, which will be very helpful in piecing together the 3D structure. And it's very exciting. And you know, this result by Nico Garavito Camargo, who did the simulation in Charlie Conroy, that showed that, you know, because the LMC and the SMC together are so massive, they actually induce a dark matter wake in the Milky Way halo, and they've actually observed this. Right, so here's from Nico's simulation showing the mean over and under density that's associated with the dark matter wake, that is the Magellanic Clouds passing through the Milky Way. So it's overdense in some parts and underdense in others. And by selecting red giants in Gaia and picking out distance slices, they were able to actually make this map of over and under densities of red giants on the sky in the Milky Way halo, which very closely agrees with Nico's simulation, which is tremendously exciting. I just wanted to put up the Rubin LSST footprint here. Right, so here are the Magellanic Clouds. We'll be covering all of this area, which maps quite well to the region where we would expect this dark matter wake to have formed. So we could be, you know, probing this with our Lyrae stars, main sequence turnoff stars, all the tracers that we will get in Rubin to try to piece together you know, the structure in the Milky Way halo, and maybe discover new things that we don't know about yet either. So I think the discovery potential here is just really, really huge. All right, I'm gonna finish there and wrap up by saying, you know, we have so much data now on the Magellanic Clouds, and Gaia has been tremendous here. That allow us to explore the internal kinematics of the Magellanic Clouds in detail. I think these models are pointing to really having a strong interaction between the LMC and the SMC, is having a big effect on what we see in the internal kinematics. Rubin is going to contribute great things here. And because there's so much data and simulations and models, so putting together a consistent picture here, I think remains challenging, but also an opportunity with the kinds of new techniques that people are developing in data science and in many other fields. So thank you, and that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments? Alex, please.
What fraction of LMC mass is in these outliers that we showed kinematics?
Yeah, so it was roughly 5% of the population that we had selected, right? So it was which were AGB and RGB stars mainly. So naively, I would say 5%, but depending on it does raise some issues, right? So the as Mark Dickinson pointed out, if it's 5% and most of it came from the SMC, and the mass ratio between the SMC and the LMC is 10:1, that means half of the SMC got deposited into the LMC, which would be substantial. But I think, as we saw from the metallicities, it's a mix, right, of LMC and SMC like metallicities. So it might not be as extreme as that. So yeah, I think the combination of continued work on the picking out the kinematic outliers, combining it with metallicities to piece, to try to find the origin, could give a more accurate answer to that. Yeah, that's a good question.
More questions? Yeah, Raquel?
So it's still about with outlier stars, the LMC. So some works detect a work with the LMC
Yeah,
from both stars, right?
yeah,
As well.
yeah.
So are they is the work considered in the dynamical studies?
Yeah. So the stuff I was showing on the outlier stars that in the main body of the LMC and are at a much smaller radius than where those large scale works are, which are out at sort of 10 kiloparsecs and beyond. There is, but we do have some evidence of smaller scale warps within that area, so it could have an effect. Yeah, we've. I mean, if you look at, for instance, this model here, like this is taking this kinematics and trying to measure the inclination, comparing it to the geometric quantity and just from the kinematics, right? So within the few degrees where we're looking, up to like 6 degrees here, there is some change in the inclination, and you would certainly, if you model it as this tilted ring thing that we did here, you would say that there could be some warping, but the real warps kick in at larger radii, this 8 kiloparsecs about, and beyond would be stronger. Yeah.
How massive is LMC in comparison to the Milky Way?
Yes, so I think that the total mass, including the halo mass, right, is 1 or 2 times 10 to the 11th, right? And Milky Way is like 10 to the 12th and a few, right? So it's something like an order of magnitude, I think, but maybe could be just a factor of 5. I mean, it's quite a bit more massive than I think earlier studies had sort of presumed. Yeah. Yeah, and you can see this actually in the in the Gaia proper motion data, right? So there was the Charlie Conroy paper, but you can also see that within just the inner halo, which you can see that there's sort of a mass motion of the disk proper motion particles. This is from Dennis Urkel, compared to at larger distances, essentially just from sort of the LMC yanking on the Milky Way disk, and you can actually measure that in the proper motion data. It's as if the halo is coming towards us at some large velocity. Yeah.
They're taking the mass measured to the 13 kiloparsecs is, let's say, 2 or 3 to the 10th.
Yeah.
Solar masses. So
yes.
We are in fact in the hollow LMC or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I guess there is some overlap there. I mean, if you look at the 3D models of the dark matter wake, for instance, that Nico Garavito has, yeah, it's huge, right? So I think we do sit within some part of the structure that's being affected by the LMC's passage through the halo, whether it's actually inside the LMC halo. I'm not totally sure. I have to. Yeah, we could. Right. Yeah.
I wonder how overlap the
Yeah.
Milky Way.
Oh yeah, they're definitely embedded, right? I mean, so and exactly how that interaction happens, I think, you know, that's the way. Yeah. Yeah, with Rubin, right? We'll get our Lyra out to 400 kiloparsecs or so, which is, you know, halfway to the distance of M31. M31 is in the northern hemisphere, of course, right? But I do wonder whether we'll see the potential overlap of M31's halo with that in the Milky Way. That could be cool.
Short question.
Very short.
You used the word passage, speaking about LMC passing here, Milky Way.
Yeah.
Wasn't the first passage?
Oh yeah. So I think, I mean, I think the Nietzsche's and Gertina's work on the proper motions and the modeling of it have pretty clearly shown that it's either the first passage or a very long orbit, and which could have been the second passage. But yeah. So that seems to work well with the kinematics, and is also what you would expect from cosmological scenarios, right? Where having a bound multi-passage satellite galaxy like the Magellanic Clouds is actually quite unlikely, but having this recent infall is kind of what you'd expect. The fact that they're a close interacting binary system is pretty unusual, but yeah, it's what we have.
So what about intermediate mass black hole and LMC?
Yeah, right. So one thing that we've been trying to do with looking at the simulations and also the data is see if you can really track down the kinematic center. And it seems to be very dependent on populations when you look at the data. When you look at the simulations, it doesn't wander around that much. And so I wonder if there will almost certainly be an intermediate mass black hole, but where to find it, I think, is not clear. I think that in the interaction and the internal kinematics may have caused it to drift somewhere. And so knowing where to look is and what the observational signature is the tricky part. Yeah.
Time is over, so thank you very much.
Okay.
Fine, we survived. And next week there's going to be a seminar by Priyanka Yalan. That's going to be about more distant universe, so more like quasar or cosmological stuff. So feel welcome. And I remind you about the black notebook paper one. Yes. So if there's any student who would like to fill it, please do so. Thank you very much.
Yeah.